I made peace. I knew not to trust, yet I had no choice. Maybe you were right. Maybe the slow death is worse than the fast one. Maybe none of these men are good. Maybe a world in which they came to us is a world that we cannot endure. But endure we must.
Hello everyone, I finally finished Red Dead about 2 weeks ago, and I managed to avoid spoilers up to that point, which is great. One history vid I felt I should talk about is the Native American aspects of the Reservation System and other items within the game. Ever since Europeans began coming to the Americas, there have been troubles between natives and settlers alike. Everywhere from the French and Indian Wars, during the American War for Independence, and the so-called Indian Wars, Indian Wars, Native Americans were a part of this nation's conflicts, whether in support or against. There have been hundreds of confrontations, but to cut it short, due to an exploitation of tribal rivalries, being crushed in ambushes and surprise attacks on their camps, and the destruction of food sources, the constant onslaught forced practically all surviving tribes to capitulate. Yet the United States was not done dicking around. Having repeatedly garnered the thought that they enjoyed freedoms much more than Europe and the rest of the world, conquering other peoples and taking their land in plain terms sounded a lot like colonialism. It wasn't a good look. So, they claimed they were helping the natives out of their barbaric ways so they can enjoy modern society. While this is completely bullplop, it created some policies and euphemisms still around today. The natives were seen by most Europeans, Americans, and politicians as adults with childlike minds, barbaric peoples who needed to be civilized, relics from a bygone age, or some combination thereof. Natives probably thought of them as batshit crazy-ass serial killers at the most, and who used almost any excuse to take land and life away. Some whites were cool, but most were racist, ignorant, and or generally not respectful to native customs or feelings. And to be frank, many native tribes, even before the onset of the Europeans, could be extremely violent and cruel in their own right. Now that you have an overview, by the game's time, most tribal peoples were on reservations. The Red Dead series has always displayed this story when bringing in native characters, but it receives much more focus and attention in RDR2, especially during the last few missions. The first Native American reservation in the United States was created around colonial times in 1758, but all reservations were basically Europeans and Americans wanting the land and finding some way to get the natives off it, yet still wanting it to sound legitimate for the public. The Native Americans displayed in the game are Lakota, or Sioux. They dressed in the same style as the tribe, and one of them even speaks Lakota as I rode by. It really displays the rock and a hard place many tribes were in. Rights and lands were taken away at will and still are today on many reservations all over the country. And if young warriors got angry at this and retaliated in some way, they would be seen as criminals and dealt with harshly. The Lakota are arguably one of the most well-known, respected, and featured tribal nations shown in movies, games, and other media when Native Americans are talked about. They, along with the Cheyenne and Arapaho, were the ones to give General Custer his last bad decision, which ruined the US Centennial Party. They dominated other tribes, originally coming from the Great Lakes region and pushing other tribes out of much of the northern plains. They were the tribe to make the US halt and temporarily abandon the westward expansion after the Fetterman fight. Captain Fetterman said he could ride through the whole Sioux Nation with about 80 men. But when fate came and he actually had 80 men with him, he didn't get more than a mile or two outside the fort before him and his entire unit were wiped out. They are the tribe of the famous leaders of Red Cloud, Sitting Bull, and Crazy Horse. The accomplishments and bravery of the Lakota tribe and other tribal nations is what makes the reservation system so hard to bear.
Go here, try and help there, I'm better off alone.
We're riding with you.
Come on then. Yeah!
Let's ride!
We often hear of US soldiers committing wanton slaughter on men, women, and children during the so-called Indian Wars, and for the most part, it's true. What we hear less of are soldiers who refuse to do so. They would often be seen as a disgrace, and either court-martialed or ostracized out of the army and much of regular society. In a side mission, and a few main ones, we get to see soldiers who treated Native Americans with respect and caring. Some real-life counterparts, and forgive me for mispronouncing, are Captain Silas Saul and Lieutenant Joseph Kramer. Both refused to let their men shoot and fire at women and children during the Sand Creek Massacre, and even went so far as to call the other men cowards for following orders. They were both threatened by their commanding officer, Colonel Shivington, but their letters did open up an investigation on the matter. After the fighting, once Native Americans were settled down on reservations, schools were developed to change the Indian within and educate them in the ways of U.S. society. It was a weird view that natives would evolve and be better off if only they learned U.S. education. And one thing this education taught was to destroy, ignore, and denounce their past. Of course, even if a Native American child excelled at school, they would never be fully accepted by U.S. society. These schools served as a false symbol of progressive politics for mostly ignorant American people who had never met a Native American person in their life and only knew of the barbaric stories told in newspapers. Let's just face it, the 19th century wasn't exactly the shining light of wholesomeness in American history. But in time, the reservations also served as a last remaining vestige of tribal unity, and became places where tribal members could hold on to some parts of their culture that were otherwise attacked from outside. And many Native Americans, regardless, still deal with many issues on the reservation today. So without giving away too many spoilers, RDR2 has gone to great lengths to show the anger, frustration, and anguish the history of the reservation system has left on the United States. I'm Eric, the LonePineWolfman, and if you like this video, please click the like button and subscribe for more content. Remember gamers, never stop learning.